They didn't believe in me that day. But the moment I took the microphone, I knew there was no turning back. I wasn't asking to be accepted. I was daring them to hear what I already knew I was.
They didn't want him there. They didn't ask for his opinion. And they definitely didn't want his voice. To most people in that room, he was just another strange kid. Too intense, too opinionated. Someone who spoke as if he already belonged to a place that wasn't his yet. And that kind of confidence makes people uncomfortable. It always has. For months, he watched in silence. He sat through rehearsals, memorized every movement, every mistake, every empty space no one else seemed to notice. And even while being ignored, something inside him was absolutely certain of one thing: this wasn't complete. They believed talent needed approval before it could be heard. He knew talent only needed courage. What no one realized was that this moment of rejection was about to turn into a breaking point. Not because he pushed harder, not because of luck, but because of one simple, almost impulsive move that would change everything. When he finally grabbed the microphone, it wasn't to ask for permission. It was to prove that some voices aren't meant to wait for an invitation. And what happened next didn't just create a band. It created a before and an after. But to understand why that microphone changed everything, we need to step back. Because long before he was rejected at that rehearsal, he had been overlooked his entire life. And that shaped every note that was about to leave his mouth. Before we continue, if you love the stories of Freddie Mercury and Queen and want to help keep his legacy alive, subscribe to this channel, like, and share. During the day, he barely stood out. He spoke little, walked with his head down, always seemed slightly out of place, like he was occupying borrowed space. To most people, he was just another student trying to fit in. But at night, something changed. While others went home to rest, he headed to small clubs, crowded rooms, makeshift stages, not to play, not to sing, to watch. He studied bands with a different kind of focus, not like a fan, but like someone who already saw himself up there. Every movement was analyzed, every crowd reaction carefully noted. He instinctively understood what worked, and more importantly, what didn't. Something was missing. There always was. What made it uncomfortable was that he didn't hide that opinion. After shows, he approached musicians, offered feedback, suggested changes, talked about stage presence, identity, visual impact. To many, it sounded arrogant. Who was this kid to tell them how a show should be? But there was one important detail. He didn't speak like someone dreaming. He spoke like someone who already knew. That quiet confidence was mistaken for arrogance, and because of that, he was pushed aside, ignored, barely tolerated. What no one realized was that while they dismissed him, he was preparing. Every night in the audience was rehearsal. Every ignored comment became fuel. He didn't need acceptance yet. He only needed one moment. And that moment was getting closer. Every origin story begins with a collapse. And this one was no different. The band he had been watching so closely started to crack from the inside. Few shows, little response, no clear direction. The singer, tired of going nowhere, decided to leave. Suddenly, what once felt stable turned into silence. Empty rehearsals, instruments untouched, doubt hanging in the air. The question was simple and brutal. Is it worth continuing? This is where most people quit. When effort brings no immediate return, when a dream feels too expensive to maintain. And for a few days, that ending felt very real. But while they saw the end, someone else saw the beginning. He had been waiting for this moment, not out of spite, but conviction. He understood that real change rarely happens when everything is comfortable. It happens when there's nothing left to lose. That's when he stepped forward. No long speech, no drama, just one direct, almost inevitable sentence. "Let me sing." The request wasn't met with excitement. There was silence, suspicious looks, a hint of awkwardness, because no one in that room truly knew if he could sing. And honestly, it was the ultimate risk. If he failed, he would disappear for good. If he succeeded, nothing would be the same. They decided to try, without knowing they were about to witness the most important moment of their lives. The microphone was right there. Simple, ordinary, like any other. But the moment he touched it, the air shifted. There was no announcement, no build-up, just a few opening chords, and then the voice. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. but it was impossible to ignore. The transformation was instant. The quiet kid vanished. In his place stood someone larger than the room itself. His posture changed. His gaze locked in. The space around him seemed to shrink, as if it had to make room for that presence. Within seconds, no one was thinking about technique or pitch. What filled the room was impact, raw, urgent energy, almost aggressive, like a voice that had been trapped for years and finally broke free. Eyes met across the room, not in excitement, but recognition. They knew. All of them knew. This wasn't just a singer trying to join a band. This was someone taking control of something that didn't even have a name yet. There was intention in every note, vision in every pause. When the song ended, the silence wasn't doubt. It was confirmation. Nothing needed to be said. The decision had already been made. In that moment, they didn't just gain a singer. They gained an identity, direction, a future. And yet, for him, it still wasn't enough, because singing was only the beginning. And what he did next would turn that group into something far bigger than any of them could imagine. After his voice filled the room, everyone knew something had changed. But he didn't look satisfied. For him, singing wasn't enough. That was just the entry point. He began talking about identity, about impact, about how people remember a name, a symbol, a feeling. He said a band shouldn't just sound good, it should be impossible to confuse with anyone else. The old name felt too small for the vision he carried. Too safe, too forgettable. He wanted something that triggered a reaction, something that caused discomfort even before the first note was played. When he suggested a new name, hesitation came instantly. It was bold, ambiguous, risky. It didn't sound like anything on the radio at the time, and that was exactly why it made sense to him. Big ideas rarely sound right at first. They sound wrong. He spoke with unsettling conviction, as if he could already see stages that didn't exist yet, crowds that didn't know they'd one day sing along. To the others, it sounded almost unrealistic. To him, it felt inevitable. In that moment, he wasn't just joining a band. He was imposing a vision, and without even realizing it, the others began to follow him. Not out of submission, but because they felt something rare: direction. And when someone offers direction in a moment of doubt, people listen. Still, something essential was missing. For that vision to survive, the group had to be complete. The idea was clear. The identity was starting to take shape. But reality was unforgiving. The lineup wouldn't settle. People came and went. Nothing seemed to lock in perfectly. Rehearsals piled up without progress. Small gigs appeared and vanished without a trace. Sometimes there was more equipment on stage than people in the audience, and that tests anyone's belief. There were moments when quitting felt easier, choosing a safer path, accepting that maybe the vision was too big for such a small beginning. But no one there was chasing comfort. The search for the missing piece became almost obsessive. Some musicians had skill but no sensitivity. Others had attitude but couldn't listen. Something was always missing. And, strangely, the right person didn't demand attention, didn't push forward, didn't try to prove anything. He just played. When he finally appeared, there was no spectacle, no speech, just a quiet realization that, for the first time, the sound held itself together. No excess, no conflict. The group breathed differently. Not every connection is explosive. Some are silent. But those are the ones that last. Slowly, that unlikely combination began to work. Not perfectly, not yet, but honestly. And honesty, when paired with ambition, creates something dangerous. Now, they had everything they needed. Even if they still had nothing. The first months were brutal. Little money, little recognition, long nights walking home, wondering if any of it made sense. Some days the choice was painfully simple: eat or keep going. They kept going. They carried their own gear, played to nearly empty rooms, adjusted sound through the clatter of glasses and side conversations. Nothing felt glamorous, but everything was necessary. It was during this time that something crucial formed, not on stage, but off it. A quiet trust, an unspoken agreement that no one would walk away at the first sign of struggle. While other bands fought over ego, they learned how to listen. While many tried to fit trends, they insisted on building something of their own without any guarantee that anyone would care. And there was something different about that vocalist. Off stage, he was reserved, almost shy. But when he sang, it was as if he carried the weight of every frustration and turned it into presence. into force. That contrast was impossible to ignore. Little by little, people felt it, even if they couldn't explain why. There was something there that wasn't finished yet, but it was already real. A kind of energy you can't teach. They weren't famous. They weren't big, but they were already unmistakable. And sooner or later, that changes everything. At some point, ambition stopped being exciting and started becoming frightening, not just to those watching, but to the people inside it. That vocalist's vision was growing too fast. Bigger stages, bigger sound, bigger gestures. Everything had to be pushed to the edge. And that wasn't always comfortable. There were arguments, not just about music, but about identity. How far is too far? When does courage turn into excess? When does bold become ridiculous? Those questions surfaced often, especially while the outside world still offered no validation. But he kept pushing, always. He believed that if they were going to fail, it should be while attempting something no one else dared to try. That the real mistake wasn't going too far, it was becoming forgettable. That mindset created tension, but it also created motion. And motion beats stagnation every time. While other bands started to blur together, they began to sound different. Not better yet, but different enough to provoke a reaction. And provoking a reaction is the first step toward being remembered. Slowly, people started talking. Not praising, questioning, laughing, doubting. And that was perfect. Because indifference kills. Criticism doesn't. Without realizing it, they crossed an invisible line. From that point on, they would never be ignored again. Loved or hated, maybe, but invisible, never. And that meant the decisive moment was getting close. There was one specific show when something became clear. Not to the audience, but to them. This group was no longer trying to fit anywhere. They were creating their own space. The response was still small, but it was intense. People didn't leave indifferent. They walked out talking, debating, trying to explain what they had just seen. And when someone tries to explain something they don't fully understand, it's because it touched them. The voice was no longer just impact. It had control, intention, direction. The stage stopped being a place to perform and became territory. Every movement felt deliberate, even when it looked spontaneous. And that changes the relationship with the audience. They didn't ask for attention. They took it. The early rejection finally made sense. If they had been accepted easily, maybe they would have never gone this far. Maybe they would have never built something so distinct. Sometimes, no is the push that's missing. That day, without headlines, without signs, without historic applause, something truly began. Not a band, a stance. They weren't there to please. They were there to leave a mark. And when someone truly leaves a mark, the world eventually responds, even if it takes time. The impact didn't have a name yet, but it was already impossible to contain. Looking back, it all feels inevitable, but it wasn't. Every step could have ended in quitting. Every rejection could have been the final one. Nothing was guaranteed. What made the difference wasn't isolated talent. It was the rare combination of vision, persistence, and the courage to step forward when no one asked. He wasn't rejected because he was weak, but because he was early, because he saw something others couldn't yet imagine. And that always scares people. History loves celebrating outcomes, but it ignores the silence that comes before. The empty rooms, the nights without applause, the doubtful looks. That's what shapes those willing to go all the way. In that rehearsal, when he grabbed the microphone, he wasn't just singing, he was refusing to disappear. He was saying without words that he would not be reduced to anyone else's expectations. And that refusal echoes. Because at its core, this isn't just the story of a band being born. It's the story of anyone who's ever been underestimated. Anyone who's heard no while knowing they had more to give. Some voices don't ask for space. They create it. And when that happens, nothing is ever the same again. If there's something truly powerful about this story, it's not the success that came later. It's the moment before. The instant when everything could have gone wrong. When no one expected anything, and that's exactly why everything was possible. He could have accepted silence. He could have stayed in the crowd. He could have waited for permission, but he chose to act. And that simple gesture, grabbing the microphone, changed the course of everything. The world isn't always ready to hear your voice. But that doesn't mean it doesn't matter. Sometimes the only difference between being ignored and being remembered is the courage to step forward at the right moment, even shaking, even without guarantees, even knowing you might fail. If this story resonated with you, that's probably not a coincidence. Maybe there's something inside you waiting for its moment too. And if you believe in stories like this of people who were rejected but refused to quit, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share your story in the comments. I want to know, have you ever been underestimated? Because sometimes all it takes is the courage to grab the microphone